Hi, my name is Nick Angel, and I am a sophomore here at SNHU. And for the past 2 weeks, I've been researching Pink Floyd's The Wall, along with the business side of the music industry. That research has led me to a thesis that states the clash between marketability and art could be seen playing out in the music business throughout the last several decades. Examples range from Taylor Swift's management attempts to control her music and licensing to Canadian rock bands Rush's label's efforts to make them more mainstream to Elvis Presley's manager, The Colonel, trying to market the king in rock and roll as family friendly and an average American. The friction often results in the killing of the golden goose as the needs of the musician to be creative rubs against the need to make money. The record label management industry, it has a market size of about $9.7 billion, which approximately 600 to 700 acts per year get signed each year. So, with that kind of size and income, you think record labels are making the decisions with the artist's best interest in mind, right? Well, that's wishful thinking because throughout my investigation, I have revealed that is not true at all. With my research, I have proven that record labels and management can be greedy and absolutely do not have the best interests of artists in mind and can eventually lead to their downfall. So, this leads me to my first point, where the record labels and management can be a direct cause of self destruction of an artist's self and their career. So, let's take Elvis as an example. Elvis was an artist who lived in Tennessee. He started his career there and he was kind of a country singer. He had a different kind of music style, which made him famous. Um, at 13 years old, he was part of a group with other guitarists, and eventually he got discovered by a man named Colonel Tom Parker, who was to be Elvis's manager. Now, Colonel Tom Parker was to be Elvis's right hand man, his manager, his guide throughout his whole music career. And when he discovered Elvis, he helped him release Heartbreak Hotel, one of his most famous and most known albums, with RCA Victor Records at 20 years old, and he got a profit of about $5.4 million, and Elvis split that 50-50 with the Colonel, which was their agreement for all of his profits. He would split everything 50-50. And Elvis appeared to be doing well. He was rising fast. He was getting more and more records. However, Elvis started having bigger dreams, like he wanted to tour overseas and do all this like new stuff. But the Colonel denied that in favor of these cheap TV appearances, movie appearances, and brand deals, all to make a quick buck um, uh, without a large effort. Now, Elvis had some controversy behind him. He was often associated with the devil because of his sexually suggestive dance moves and the type of music he had and the power he had over young girls. So, in light of that, the colonel decided to have Elvis enlist in the army, not as just an officer and go through officer school, but as a regular enlisted man like anybody else would. Now, Elvis wasn't exactly a normal soldier. His fans would follow him around at the military base or wherever he was deployed in Germany at the time, so they could follow around their favorite rock artist. So Elvis would party a lot, and he got into drugs while he was there. He started abusing a lot of prescription drugs, non-prescription drugs, and that carried over to when he got home. Because when he got home, he had to cope with his mother's death, and he also had to cope with the stresses of trying to be a family-friendly rock artist and do all these cheap TV deals and movie appearances and brand deals that the Colonel wanted him to do. So he turned to drugs. Now, Elvis had a personal doctor whose name was Dr. Nick, and Dr. Nick prescribed anything Elvis needed to get through the day or his performances. No drugs that any sane doctor would prescribe a perfectly healthy man, which eventually led to his death at age 42. Now, talking to his wife, Elvis said, I didn't have them. I'd never make it through the day myself, but that's okay. They're safe. And that was in an article by the Washington Post. And this absolutely wasn't true. They were not safe, and he eventually died. Um, and Elvis declined because of this, because of the pressures and the drug use. He eventually became fat, and in a lot of his appearances, he'd mumble the words to songs, and he was really sweaty and just was not performing well. Um, so, in the style section, they wrote Elvis is fat. Um, they wrote this in 1976. Not only is he fat, his stomach hangs over his belt, his jowls hang over his collar, and his hair hangs over his eyes. And again, this was an article in the Washington Post. So Elvis was just one of many examples of management and record labels causing the downfall and self-destruction of an artist. And we could tie this into Pink Floyd's The Wall. In the movie, there's a scene, Comfortably Numb, it's called, where Pink is found in a chair in his hotel room, and he's completely unresponsive, slumped back in the chair. And his management comes in along with a bunch of paramedics and some members of the band, and they ignore the state he's in, and they just give him a bunch of drugs to get him to perform. And that's their only concern. They want to get him to perform instead of getting him some help. So they inject him, they drag him out into the hallway, and then throw him into a limo, and that's it. They don't get him to a hospital or anything. They just throw them into a limo. And I thought this was an excellent representation of the type of self-destruction that happens in the music industry due to just manipulation and abuse by record labels. Now, this brings me to another point, which record labels often mistreat their artists, mismanage them, and manipulate them, and that can lead to a lot of challenges in their career and a lot of times the end of their careers. This could have happened to Taylor Swift. We'll talk about now. Taylor Swift was a young, kind of a country style artist. She was really young when she got discovered, about 13 years old. She got picked up by Big Machine Records at this time, and she released 6 of her most popular albums, including Fearless and Red. So she recorded those. However, in exchange for a cash advance, she did not own the masters to those albums, meaning she couldn't. There was a lot of licensing issues. She didn't own them technically. Um, so this became a problem when the company Big Machine Records got sold, and it got sold right from out from under her. Even though they tried to argue that she knew about the company sale because her dad had a stake in the record owner's company, not the record, his other company. Um, so they tried to argue that Taylor did know about the purchase of the company of Big Machine Records, but she didn't, and that led to, well, her masters being sold to the new owner of Big Machine Records, which was a challenge because the new owner of Big Machine Records did not allow her to use any of her first 6 albums at the 2019 American Music Awards or her new documentary Miss Americana. So, in spite of this, she ended up starting the process of re-recording all 6 of her first albums, which um, wasn't the greatest thing because A, that's a lot of work, and B, because a lot of people were upset because when she recorded those 6 albums, she was just a teenager, and when she re-recorded these, she was not. It was like this was like 10 years later or more, so she lost kind of the awkwardness of her voice and her tone of her voice changed, and a lot of people didn't love this, but still, um, her new albums, which she released Red and Fearless, however she had named them, Taylor's version at the end to avoid copyright and licensing issues, and they still broke records on online streaming platforms wherever she sold them. So that shows that record labels can really be sneaky and tricky and really aren't acting in the best interest of artists. And we can also talk about Rush, who was kind of an exception to these examples in my thesis. Um, they were a rock band, one of the most popular ones in their era, and this wasn't always how it went because they were under the contract of Mercury Records, who wanted them to follow more the blues style of music, the blues style of rock, and do what they had been doing, which was copying other bands at the time, and they wanted to do what Led Zeppelin was doing. So they obviously didn't want to do this. They wanted to go into a more progressive style and do what they wanted and do a bunch of wild concept albums. And well, the record company kept pushing back, saying, "No, you can't do this because it's not going to sell well." So, well, Rush, instead of following the orders, they were preparing to do a goodbye album or a farewell album because they wanted to make an album with their style and their stay and do their own thing. So this was going to be their final album where they were expecting to be cut by Mercury Records and never picked up by anyone again. However, this was not true. The album was called 2112 and was a really wild intergalactic space theme, with a tyrannical government banning anything creative like music, art, books, all that stuff, which is really similar to their battle with Mercury Records, who was limiting their creative freedom. So 2112 actually made them take the reins of their own career, and it made them become one of the most successful and well-known rock bands of their time, which is really a drastic difference from the last artists I talked to, like Elvis and Taylor Swift, where the demands of Mercury Records actually turned Rush into something new, and yeah, really just helped out their career. Now, the record label industry has less prevalence in today's world. It's easier to get discovered than ever. You can uh, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. You can put your songs on there, and a lot of artists nowadays don't even use. They don't need record labels or management. They manage themselves and they release stuff themselves, which is really good. However, record labels and management are still manipulating artists and killing creative freedom in order to make a few extra dollars. So that is still happening today, regardless of what happens.